A likely starting defender on the Colts finds himself in some hot water, and now fans must ask themselves what it means, what's next, and what the Colts might do about it. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL. And when you enter our promo code LockedOnNFL, they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. I don't know about you guys, but I've got a million of those at the house. Can't get enough of them. Will I throw any away? Never. And you can't make me do it either. I am Jake Arthur. Today I'm joined by Zach and my colleague over at horseshoehuddle.com, Drake Wally. Drake, welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining us once again.
Yeah, it's I wish it was under some better circumstances. We'll get to the better circumstances, but I'm honored to be back on Locked On and really excited to discuss a little bit of the future of the team here.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you haven't, I'm sure he's a machine. You guys have probably read stuff he's got over at horseshoehuddle.com. We're actually going to get to one of those things that he wrote on Tuesday here in a moment, but he and Andrew Moore also host the Horseshoe Huddle podcast over on YouTube. So after here, go ahead and subscribe to that as well. But on today's show, we're going to discuss the situation surrounding Isaiah Rodgers Sr. And the NFL's investigation into his sports betting / gambling habits, what it means for both him and the Colts short and long term, and what the team might do about it next. Then we're actually going to end the show on a positive note, though, talking about some things that we're actually looking forward to this summer from a Colts perspective. Because you guys heard from Zach a couple of times yesterday. We're going to devote the first couple segments of this to the Rodgers thing. I think we could all depart on some positive vibes today.
Yeah.
But if you're unfamiliar with the situation so far, basically on Monday, sportshandle.com came out with a report that said an unnamed Colts player was under investigation for a pervasive amount of bets placed, last year for, I don't think anyone's reported yet how long it went, but basically a whole bunch of bets, they said. And then our other colleague, Destin Adams, came out and broke that it was Isaiah Rodgers Sr., someone who is expected to be a starting cornerback for the Colts this year. So really, unfortunately, if the NFL's investigation comes true and finds that he did, in fact, do these things that he's alleged to do, then it's going to be ugly. It's going to be a pretty big opportunity squandered for him. ESPN came out with some further context. Stephen Holder wrote this. He said the sportsbook account was opened under the name of an associate of Rodgers, a source said. Approximately 100 bets were placed on the account over an undisclosed amount of time, including on Colts games. Remember, that's going to be a huge deal. The source said most of the bets were in the $25 to $50 range, although there was at least one low four-figure bet. So that's not great on its face. So initially all we had on Monday evening were just these reports that it was Rodgers. Destin came out and said it, and then ESPN and some other big fish came out and verified that as well. And then the big one, Rodgers himself came out with his own apology. As you guys can read it here, I'll leave it up for a minute or so. He took responsibility for it. He confirmed that it is him that's under investigation. It's a privilege to play for the Colts. He's sorry for disappointing his teammates as fans and those close to him. But yeah, this is a tough situation, Drake, because don't forget, he's also in a contract year, and he was going to be entering a season that saw him see his most significant defensive role yet, you've got to think.
Yeah, and kind of like what Zach and Shot had mentioned on the last episode is, obviously there's going to be upset fans. There's going to be upset people that were really pulling for Isaiah Rodgers. But it's not to drag him through the mud. Everybody makes mistakes, but it's really from the standpoint of a lot of people felt he didn't get the snaps he deserved. A lot of people were looking forward to a high trajectory for this guy. He was the cornerback too. He was going to get a substantial bump in playing time, especially with three, which is unprecedented. 3 cornerbacks drafted in the same draft. I saw it as they're all 3 going to learn from Kenny Moore. They're all 3 going to learn from Isaiah Rodgers. But yeah, when you look at this situation, you look at Calvin Ridley, and then you look at the Lions situation, and those were like a couple bets, and some of those weren't even in the NFL. And some of those weren't. I think Ridley's was on the Falcons, but it was like 1-2 bets or something like that. This is a lot different. It's hundreds of bets, and it's multiple ones involving your own team. With the way the season went, questions are obviously stirring. Which games were. That's really not. I don't think that really matters as much as just the quantity of bets. But again, this is a guy that knows what he did. He knows he did something wrong. And I do think that the NFL, kind of like it's been mentioned multiple times, I do think that because of the volume of bets that was, put down and the way that it was done through another account, kind of like sneakily, I think they're gonna bring the hammer down on this one. I think that they're gonna show the rest of the league, look, this is the 3rd time this has happened in just a couple of years, and all we've done is just suspend people. So maybe we need to make an example of this guy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't see this coming to a good conclusion if their investigation does ring true. And again, if the things he's alleged to have done, they have found to be conclusively accurate. Because, Calvin Ridley, he was away from the team. He was taking a leave of absence and bet on the team, and they got him for a year. It was indefinitely, but it was for a full year before he could be reinstated. And then, all these guys with the Lions, there was like 5 or 6 guys between the Lions, and then I think someone on the Commanders as well. Like you said, I don't even think it was NFL bets, but it was within the team facility. So a handful of them got like 6 games. A couple of them got released by the Lions as well. So like we mentioned, this is a contract year for Rodgers. And while he was probably going to be a starter this year, the Colts did literally just draft 3 potential replacements. So if you go by the Calvin Ridley thing and think that he's going to be gone for at least a year, well, there's 3 guys who have had a whole year to carve out a role. And someone like Juju Brents was brought in to start. Darius Rush was hopefully brought in to start at least at some point down the road. But yeah, I can't say for sure what it's going to be yet, but just looking at recent precedent, 6 games is going to be the minimum, I would think. And like you said, it seems like this isn't a naive thing. Like he did it under an account that wasn't for his name. He did it a lot of times. And this has been the rule for a while. When I was writing for the Colts website, I had to agree not to bet and everything. So like it's been going on for a while. Everyone in the league knows they're not supposed to be doing this. So I understand where the league is coming from, upholding the integrity of the game, because you don't want anyone's bets to influence anything they do. It sucks for Rodgers, those lapses in judgment, but it was like at least 100 lapses in judgment. So it sucks for the Colts, for him, because you don't want it to ruin his career. You got to hope things level out at some point, but yikes, man. So next we're going to look at a few free agents that are out there that could help ease the burden of Rodgers' potential absence if he does in fact get suspended. But first, a word from our friends over at Birddogs. Fellas, it's warm out now, and that means the sky's out, the thighs are out. And Birddogs will make you guys look good. Their stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of stiff, restricting cotton, and they fix the issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches so that you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice any movement. You always got to stay limber on your feet, fellas. You don't know what's out there. Birddogs also uses an anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. It's the perfect golf short, I'll tell you that much. And it's great because a lot of those materials that are supposed to be moisture wicking and everything, they just make you smell terrible. But Birddogs actually doesn't. So go to birddogs.com/lockedonnfl and enter promo code LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnfl for a free Yeti style tumbler. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. We promise you that much. And everydayers, we're cutting down to 3 episodes a week now, but we're still going to be bringing you the regular content. We've got you the latest on the Isaiah Rodgers situation. Obviously, you heard from Zach a couple times yesterday with Rashad McGinnis of horseshoehuddle.com. So keep up on that. Obviously, we've also got the 99 days until kickoff series that I've been posting since the weekend. In that, I highlighted Colts player that's worn the jersey number of however many days left it is until Colts kickoff. As of Tuesday, that was 96 days. So if you're listening to this on Wednesday, it's going to be 95 days. You will have to wait and find out who I pick for that. So moving along, I mentioned at the top of the show that Drake had a pretty good piece that came out on Tuesday talking about a few free agent options that could kind of help save the day for the Colts if Rodgers does get put on the shelf for a while. So Drake, you've highlighted here Casey Hayward, Fabian Moreau, and Marcus Peters. Why don't you go ahead real quick and just tell us, what really stuck out about these 3 guys and why they might be good fits for the Colts?
Oh, first off, speaking of Danico Autry, that's one that to this day I wish the Colts just would have maybe held on to. But
right, that stings, doesn't it?
He makes you know that it stings. It stung him a little bit too. He plays his best football against us, but or against the Colts. So with the situation that happened, I personally felt like these 3 guys fit the mold of, look, it's kind of like you're hitting the emergency button just a little bit. So maybe the age doesn't matter as much. I kicked off with Casey Hayward because I felt like, he's a 2-time Pro Bowler. He's played with 4 different franchises. He actually started all of his games last year for Atlanta and had a season cut short. It's a guy who can step right in and he can bring just all of the experience you need, which is exactly what they really need right now. I think that your DB3 right now is probably Dallas Flowers, which nothing against Dallas Flowers. He doesn't have a whole lot of defensive experience just quite yet. He was mostly a special teamer. But you're talking about 152 games. You're talking about 448 tackles, 3 defensive touchdowns, 112 passes defended, and 25 picks. That's a lot of football. And that's a lot of knowledge and experience that a guy like Casey Hayward could prove way more valuable than maybe other teams might look at him like. Right now, I think that he potentially could be the front runner for the Indianapolis Colts. As far as like, how long would he stay with the team? It'd probably be like a 1-year contract. Who knows? He might not even start. But just having him there, man, it's going to help those rookies, I really think. And it's going to help guys like Dallas Flowers and even Kenny Moore, who's coming off of a pretty rough year, bounce back.
I agree. And I like that one a lot because it feels like something the Colts would actually do. That's a Rodney McLeod thing. Stephon Gilmore, even to a lesser degree. They don't care if you're very long in the tooth, but if you bring the experience and can help bring these young guys along, that's what it's all about. Because, Gilmore was brought into play, of course, but I don't think they envisioned Rodney McLeod having the role that he did. He was the starter at strong safety all year because Nick Cross just wasn't ready. But, we've heard these stories, throughout the years of these Colts veterans helping guys so much. Mike Mitchell back in 2017 or whatever year it was where he played the tail end of the year. These guys help the development of these players a lot. And it's really important. Casey Hayward's a good one because he's well over 30, but he's got some quality football still in him. But at that age and a price tag that probably wouldn't be very much at all, you're not bringing him in and guaranteeing him to start. Exactly. So if he just plays your Brandon Faison role from last year, that's perfectly fine. You have Juju Brents there starting, maybe Dallas Flowers or Darius Rush is seeing a fair amount of action, and Hayward is in there as well. You can kind of set it and forget it. You trust him because he's been there and done that for over a decade. So I like that one a lot. What was it about Morrow that drew you to him?
So I actually liked Fabian Moreau because it was kind of like I put in the article. It was a name that really doesn't jump off the page, but when you look at his line of work, he actually is coming off of a pretty good year with the Giants. I think he set career highs in tackles. He had the second best passes defense of his entire career, just missed it by one. He had 10, and I think the career high is 11. I think that if you're looking for kind of like Casey Hayward type of leadership, but maybe about 4 or 5 years younger, and you might be able to get a couple years out of the guy. I think that that's a really good fit. Now, I will say one thing that is interesting about him is that once he hit that contract year in Washington in 2020, he was then picked up by the Falcons, and then he was off to the New York Giants, and here he is again. So that's one of the things that kind of made me think, why is he bouncing around from team to team all of a sudden? Because he had a pretty solid career there in Washington. I mean, we're talking about a guy who had he had a couple interceptions throughout his career, and he played a pretty solid role for that defense, which was always competitive. I think if you're looking for more of the middle, you're looking for the bang for your buck, but you're also looking for maybe a little bit younger. Man, I think that Fabian Moreau is one of those names that no one's talking about that could have an impact and could be there for 2, maybe even 3 years if he plays well enough in Gus Bradley's scheme.
Yeah, and that's another move at this point of the offseason. You're beyond the compensatory pick formula. You're getting into mandatory minicamp time. That's a bargain bin move. He's not a Pro Bowler, but it's a guy who has started and has played good football. So just like Hayward, but at a from a different perspective, that's another kind of classic Chris Ballard move. So that one makes a lot of sense as well. Now the biggest fish out here right now, Marcus Peters, that's someone that Chris Ballard is familiar with. So it's maybe not so far-fetched.
Yeah, and there's a couple wild cards that I also kind of had in mind, but man, when you're talking about definitely the kind of like you said, the biggest fish that's out there available still, he's going to have the highest price tag. He's going to be able to have the most negotiating room because the guy is a former All-Pro and he's a multi-time Pro Bowler. I mean, this is a guy who has pretty much anything and everything you could ask for at the position. He's not even 30 years old yet. Or no, he is 30 years old. But he's got starting experience out the wazoo. He's been in the NFL since 2016. And in fact, so he's played with the Chiefs from 2015 to 2017. Then he went to the Rams, which was a Super Bowl season for them when they actually went to the championship and just barely missed it. And then he goes to the Ravens and plays one of the most prominent roles in the secondary. I mean, I think that if you're looking for, hey, look, you know what, the heck with it. We want a guy who can bring an impact. Because look, Rodgers, he was going to be a starter. Okay, this was a guy that you had on slate in a contract year. You probably wanted to give him that long-term contract. So maybe you want to just skip the veteran and the leadership thing, and you just want a guy who's going to start. I think that he would be the cornerback. He might even be a cornerback one. I mean, he's a pretty dang good player who I still think has plenty of gas left in the tank. And one of my favorite things about his stats is that, yeah, he's got, a bunch of tackles. He's got 32 interceptions, but this guy has 7 defensive touchdowns over his entire career. A lot of that was front loaded when he was younger, but this is a guy who can make plays. And this is a defense and just an overall team that I believe Ryan Kelly and Luke Rhodes are the oldest guys on the roster, and they're 30. I mean, this is a ridiculously super duper young team, even more young in the secondary. Even with guys like Dallas Flowers, they're super young. So maybe you just want to get the veteran, you want to get the guy who's the most talented, and you want to get the guy who's going to make the biggest impact all in one. And if you're willing to spend the money, he's going to be worth more than I think the dollar amount is going to indicate, because he's going to bring all of that to your secondary. And those 3 guys are definitely going to soak it up, those 3 rookies that they took in the draft this year.
Yeah, I don't hate that one. I think he would fit in with Bradley pretty well. He's got that size and length. He's not afraid to put his hands on you. Definitely a guy that knows how to take the ball away. His first few years in the league, no one else did it better. I mean, he's had some things come up in the last few years that have kind of shaken things up a little bit. But I mean, for a while, he was on everyone's top 5 cornerbacks list.
And he's just got an attitude that Just
Oh
like
yeah.
I think that defensive back room could really use right now. I mean, look, I know these guys are professionals, but they're rookies, they're young, and I'm sure that they're probably at least a little bit affected by this. And there'd be no better way to get things back on track than to bring a proven veteran in that's
Mhm.
going to make an impact. And it's going to help you get your youngsters on track.
Yeah. Again, I don't think it's very far fetched. I don't know that the Colts want to spend that much money, but they probably weren't anticipating. I mean, they knew this was coming, but they probably didn't anticipate this much noise and perhaps the level of penalty that could be coming. So, I mean,
Yeah.
they did draft these guys for a reason, but if they don't want to just throw the young guys out there and they want to bring in at least one veteran, Peters makes a ton of sense. So, next up, it is good vibes only, like I mentioned. Drake and I are going to tell you some Colts storylines that we're most looking forward to this summer. Coming up next. Okay, Drake. So I'll go ahead and get the low-hanging fruit out of the way. Anthony Richardson in training camp. That is definitely something I'm looking forward to. How's it going to look with these receivers? Alec Pierce downfield, Pittman cutting over the middle on the slant routes. What's his chemistry with Josh Downs look like? I'm interested. I'm interested. What about you?
I honestly, I'm really pumped to see what's going to happen. Like with a couple things with Dio Dangbo and Kwity Paye. I'm excited to see what that defensive front's going to look like without Adebaware. But I'm also just going to stick right with the defensive backs. I cannot wait to see now. Juju Brents and Darius Rush and even Jalen Jones might have an opportunity. Darius Rush and Juju obviously more, but I'm really intrigued by when Rush is going to get that bump to the starting role, and is it going to be Flowers in front of him? I'm looking forward to that kind of competition, but I'm pretty excited to see what those young guys are going to do in the secondary.
Yeah, one guy. So the tight end group is one I'm definitely looking forward to because outside of Jelani Woods, you really don't know what's going to happen. Mo Alley Cox probably grandfathers into a starting role still,
Again.
just based on what the Colts trust. But like we've seen players who are supposed to have a significant role either get flat out cut and not make that final roster, or be usurped on the depth chart. Because I think for most people, it makes all the sense in the world for Jelani Woods to be the top tight end going into the thing. If Mo Alley Cox isn't going to be this commanding blocker that he once was, well, he's not a better receiving threat. And then so is his blocking going to be so much better than Woods that he should be the top guy? I don't think so. But there's 7 tight ends that could really vie for a spot to not only make the roster, but have at least a rotational role. You got Will Mallory, the rookie, who is another, stretch tight end that they've got. Drew Ogletree, does he start camp on PUP? How much is he able to contribute? Because until he got hurt, he was performing like the Colts' best tight end last summer. I saw it every day. That guy was the Colts' best tight end until he got hurt. So tight end is definitely a group I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, and I'm kind of interested to see. It still hasn't been conclusively addressed outside of Akiyor. I think Emil Akiyor that they picked
Mm-hmm.
up obviously as an undrafted free agent. Now health was the final concern that kind of kept him away from the 4th and 5th round slot that he was put in by a lot of analysts. I'm really intrigued to see what are they going to do at right guard. I'm kind of surprised that a free agent veteran has not, like a Gabe Jackson, hasn't been signed to the team because, worst case scenario, he edges out Will Fries and edges out a Keyor, and you've got yourself at least a veteran there. And the best case scenario is he just being there and pushing, both of those guys, gets one of them to start. So I think that right guard last year was such a revolving door. You had guys like I think Matt Pryor played there, Danny Pinter played there, even Braden Smith switched over and played there until Will
Mm-hmm.
Fries actually like solidified the position. I think even Dennis Kelly played there. I can't remember exactly, but there was like 4 or 5 guys. That's what I'm really intrigued by. They got to get that right guard position fixed because it's not easy for guys like Ryan Kelly and Braden Smith to block when on your left or right side, respectively, you've got a defensive tack, coming through the line. So.
Yeah, we've talked about that recently. You don't want those veteran guys having to overcompensate and almost babysit.
Yep.
And you've got this rookie quarterback. You've seen the biggest recent cautionary tale in the league of what happens when you don't protect that in Andrew Luck. So you've really just got to do everything you possibly can to make life easy for Richardson. And yes, he is the most athletic quarterback in the draft, but you don't want him to have to put that on display all the time. So getting another guard, I know you've been kind of pounding the table for that all offseason. I'm definitely into it. And it doesn't have to be even a prominent guy. It can just be someone who's started before and provides insurance if something happens with Fries or if Fries just isn't cutting it. I just think you have to do a little more. My last thing, I want to see if Nick Cross does something, because what might be a little misleading is he actually did look pretty good in training camp and the preseason. He developed this niche ability to defend the end zone really well. And then once the early regular season arrived, all of a sudden he wasn't cutting it. So number one, does he pick up where he left off last summer and look good this summer again? But does he show the coaches what they're looking for him to show? Because now he's still not a starter. It's Rodney Thomas and Julian Blackmon, the starting safeties. But I've talked to Gus Bradley and Ron Milas. They are very willing to toy with the safety rotation and even use multiple guys, three or so, depending on what those guys can provide. So it's a pretty big opportunity for Cross to earn some playing time this time after getting totally phased out of defense last year.
Yeah, and one other position group that really intrigues me is on the opposite side of the ball, and that's just this running back committee. And I know that bringing in Evan Hall, who is arguably the best receiving back in the entire draft, and you've got this core of four guys. You got obviously JT, you've got Jonathan Taylor, you have Zach Moss, you have Deion Jackson, you have Evan Hall. Now, obviously, there's others on the roster, but those are really the four you're looking at. And the way that Shane Steichen utilized Miles Sanders, Kenneth Gainwell, and Boston Scott, and that backfield around Jalen Hurts, I am so intrigued to see. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor's the number one guy, but who's going to be number two? Who's going to be number three? Who's going to be number four? My wild card is Evan Hall. I think Evan Hall is going to have a pretty dang productive year, just because he's a bigger, not a huge back, but for a receiving back, they used to have Naeem Hines. Are you talking about 5'7", like maybe $175? This dude's like 6 foot tall and 200 pounds. I mean, he's a big receiving back. So I can't wait to see Evan Hall on the field, and I can't wait to see what Shane Steichen's going to do around Anthony Richardson with that core group of four running backs. That's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
No, Hall is definitely a big X factor, because I foresee him and Deion Jackson having a very similar skill set, at least initially. Yep. The primary receiving back, they're pretty good runners between the tackles and have adequate, ability to get downfield, essentially. So if Hall is able to, and special teams ability, no doubt, that's what got Deion Jackson on the roster in the first place. So if Hall, checks all those boxes and looks just as good as Jackson doing it, but he also looks really good in pass protection, which is Zach Moss's calling card. That's one of the biggest reasons he's probably going to be RB2. Then all of a sudden you've got this rookie that's flirting with the RB2 spot. So he's a pretty big X factor. Not to put too much on him, but we said a lot about Josh Downs coming out of rookie minicamp and everything. Evan Hall looked really good too. He was getting a lot of passes thrown his way and was catching everything as well. So he is definitely going to be an intriguing one to watch. I really like that you mentioned him. So I think that's it for us today, everybody. Every dayers, Zach and I are about to dive back into the position by position series that we've been doing. Next up is defensive tackles. So you obviously got Grover Stewart and DeForest Buckner. What is going on behind those guys? If you don't already, follow at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. Also, Drake's handle is right there, at D Walster Drake. Be sure to follow him. Also, subscribe to Locked On Colts on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. Same thing with Horseshoe Huddle Podcasts. They are on all the audio channels now. They're on YouTube, so make sure after this you go ahead and follow them everywhere. And then we will see you guys tomorrow.